Hey there, guys. Dragon Master here, and I want to welcome you to Star Wars in Earth, Episode 17, Codename Rise of a New Hope. So, I just have one thing to say, and that is I am so happy how the channel's been growing. We've been doing so well, so thank you all those who have been subscribing and comment down below. And really, that's all I have to say, so without further ado, let's begin. We start our journey off with Thrawn, who has just arrived back to Yavin 4. He and what's left of the Third Fleet that survived the whole battle and onslaught on Scarif are currently repairing their ships. They had arrived a bit while ago and decided to rebuild and repair their ships a bit away from Yavin 4 to make sure that in case the Empire does attack Yavin 4, if they find out where it is, that they can make a quick getaway. Thrawn didn't really trust the rebels at this point, as they had basically come after he and his forces were basically engaged in the Empire. Well, they took most of the brutal assault of the attack, and the rebels didn't only suffered minor casualties on their side. So he didn't want his ships and more of his soldiers to be shields for the rebels. But on other news, the events of New Hope would still continue on. Vader would capture the Tantan 4, Leia would be captured, C-3PO and R2-D2 would be sent below to Tatooine, and so on. The events would continue all the way until the Death Star destroyed Alderaan, and that is when Thrawn, back at Yavin 4, a bit distance away, basically he was in the ship's basically command center bridge of the ship, and was currently looking over a few reports when suddenly he got an emergency report from basically a few of their scout ships, also with news across the holonet that Alderaan had just been destroyed by the Death Star. After the Death Star was revealed to the public, many people, well, news outlets were keeping track of where the Death Star was. After seeing the destruction of Jaheda, I think it is, and also with the firing of basically destroying the Citadel on Scarif, basically, with the Death Star, which surprised Thrawn why they would destroy their own base, even though they were abandoning it. It still contained a lot of their information. Thrawn had gotten little information from that as they didn't have time to gather data. On other news, Palpatine was still furious with the Terrans and was receiving reports of the attacks on their own planets across from the border of the Terran Alliance, and he was not happy about this. He'd also received reports about the Assassin's Guild killing off high-ranking Imperials. With this, he had ordered the Death Star, after they captured Princess Leia, to head to Alderaan to destroy it, to send a message to the Terrans, as Alderaan was similar in some ways to Earth. And he would send them a message saying after he destroyed the rebels, he would be coming for them, and he would destroy Earth for the mess they had caused. Palpatine was receiving a lot of backlash, along with the Empire, from the people across the galaxy, along with many of Imperial forces in their navy, basically. Lots of them on the Death Star had heard about what the Death Star's true purpose actually was for, and they were surprised. They thought they were meant to bring peace. This caused a lot of questioning, and Tarkin decided to order everyone to watch them destroy Alderaan to show a point that if they defected or tried to leave, they would do this to their home planets. And after seeing Alderaan destroyed, the stormtroopers really didn't care, while the Imperial naval forces, those who served in the Navy, were not happy and were very disturbed by this and how their empire would do this. But across the galaxy, Imperial, basically, who served the Navy, started attacking their own, basically, forces, and people even defected. This caused a bit of chaos in the mid-rim, as this is where most of it was happening. Palpatine was furious. He wanted Princess Leia to be tortured to find out where the location of the rebel base was, as he wanted to destroy them first before he moved on to the Terran Alliance. So, Obi-Wan, Luke, and Han would head onto the Death Star while basically be caught in the tractor beam, and the events would go on all the way to Obi-Wan's death. And then they would later arrive at Yavin 4, where Thrawn had come to meet with the rebel leaders after Bail Organa's death. Mon Mothma was the one mainly in charge of the rebels now. Thrawn was surprised when he heard Alderaan was destroyed. Alderaan was very well respected amongst the galaxy, and he thought that was not a smart move on Tarkin's, a calculated move at best, as this would cause even more backlash for the Empire. And he was right. So he met with Luke Skywalker, and when he heard his last name, he was surprised by this, along with the Terran forces, as some of them had fought in the battles, and a few had even met Anakin Skywalker. He then said that he asked who his parents were, and Luke said he didn't know. This surprised Thrawn. But then he realized that this child was most likely Anakin's son, as he had heard, basically, from a few of the Terran soldiers that worked with Anakin that Anakin might have had a love interest with the senator of Naboo, Padme Amidala. This might confirm it, but he decided to forget those thoughts as they had to focus on the Death Star. Thrawn discovered that the Death Star was tracking the Millennium Falcon and was now heading to Yavin 4. He decided to work with the rebels again. So basically, he would use all of his fighters and bombers to distract the TIE fighters and keep the cannons off the rebels, as the Terrans had used most of their missiles in the attack at Scarif, so they didn't have many. And they decided to give them to the rebels to use. The rebels would attack the Death Star's weak point, as from what the schematic showed, what Han, Leia, the Millennium Falcon, everyone on the Millennium Falcon brought back. Thrawn also decided to say sorry to Princess Leia and to say that he wished that they could have saved Alderaan from the Death Star. Leia knew of Thrawn, as her father had talked with Thrawn on numerous occasions, and she was glad that he was here to help comfort her after this horrible ordeal. He also said that the Terran Alliance would offer any Alderaanian refugees a safe place to rebuild, and she was very much grateful to Thrawn for that, and the Terran Alliance. On other news, Jyn Erso and Cassandra Ordo were currently in Bacta healing up. Even though Jyn wasn't that injured, Thrawn decided to have her put in a Bacta tank just to make sure, along with Cassandra Ordo. Sorry if I have trouble saying his name. So that's where they are currently, on Thrawn's main capital ship. So Thrawn has all the fighters prepped, and the rebels do as well. Luke decides to fly in one of the X-Wings to help destroy the Death Star. And Thrawn knows that if he's the son of Anakin, he'll be a good pilot, as from what he had heard from the troops. And he, in secret, he even met Anakin once, basically, when Anakin went to the Unknown Regions. But that's a story for another time. So, the battle basically over Yavin 4 would commence as it basically went on in the New Hope. The Terran bombers and fighters would attack the TIE fighters and keep the cannons off the rebel bombers and fighters. This plan worked, but due to the Terran ships being more armored and making them much slower, they were easily attacked and damaged, causing numerous casualties on the Terran side, while the rebels only suffered a few losses. This kind of made a few Terran captains who were holding back their ships. They were basically watching from a distance, as they were currently at Yavin Prime's atmosphere, hiding. to basically make sure that the Empire's forces didn't notice their ships, as if they engaged, their ships would be torn apart. Many of the captains wanted to get into the battle, but Thrawn held them back, saying that it wasn't worth it and their ships would be torn apart by the Death Star's cannons. But Thrawn hoped that the rebels would come through. As the Death Star got in position, it was later destroyed, resulting in Tarkin and a huge part of the High Imperial High Chain Command killed off. The Terrans and the Rebels forces celebrated this victory, with the award ceremony going to them. Shepard was also given a award, basically in medal, for he had helped cover and led the forces that covered the rebels. Along with much of his crew were praised for this. But Thrawn knew that the Empire would immediately come, basically once they got their forces assembled to attack. So he ordered the rebels to basically evacuate, and he would help them as they all started packing everything up and headed for Hoth. Once everyone was on the ships, they immediately hyper jumped, basically the Hoth, where the rebels would set up their new base known as Echo Base. Thrawn felt with the Death Star destroyed, they now had a better chance of defeating the Empire, and many Terrans were hopeful this, but they also knew the war had just begun, and this war wouldn't be like the previous wars they had fought. This would be one of their bloodiest wars yet. And that is where we are going to leave this episode off. So I really have nothing to say, really. So, well, basically, please subscribe to the channel. Also, leave comment down below. And thank you.